Good morning. Do you know anyone that's had their commission taken away from them or been pulled into court for some serious questioning? Yes, being a notary can be a very serious thing, and it can have serious consequences if you don't follow the rules and follow procedures and policies that are in place to protect the public and to protect you. So let's talk about them, and if you stay until the end, you're going to hear a story that you're not going to want to miss, something that happened to me many years ago, and it was a case of fraud. So please take notes, make sure that you understand the laws in your state. This is very important. So for all purposes here, because I'm in the state of Texas, y'all, I am going to tell you how we notarize here in the state of Texas. There's only 3 ways that we can notarize a document. Now, the first way is that the person has a valid form of governmental ID. Now, for anyone that maybe has a passport, we can accept that from most countries. And then if they are from Canada or Mexico, we can actually also take their driver's license from those countries. Now, because we're on the border of Mexico and Texas, we do have a lot of people from Mexico here, and sometimes they'll present to you what's called a matrícula consular. That is not acceptable for notarizing a document. So make sure that you know exactly what type of IDs or identifications your state will allow you to accept. Now, beyond having an actual valid ID that is not expired, you can also accept a credible witness that knows the person that is signing that does not have a valid ID or is unable to present one. So the credible witness does have to present their valid ID to you in order to be able to vouch for this other person. So that is the second way to be able to notarize a document if your signer does not have a valid ID. The third way is that you personally know them. So people that I've grown up with, people that I went to school with, people that I work with, they don't need to present an ID to me because I know them. So that is 3 legitimate ways that will allow you to be able to fulfill your duty as a notary public. Is if they have a valid ID, there is a credible witness that has a valid ID, and then the third way is that you personally know them. Very simple. And if you follow those rules, you're going to be okay. Now, what happens to notaries that get into trouble is because maybe they notarize a document where the person isn't present. Or maybe they didn't verify the identity correctly. Maybe the ID that was presented to them wasn't valid. Maybe the photo didn't match. So many different things can take place, and if you just let it go, you could get into some serious trouble. Now, this isn't to scare you. In all the years that I've been a notary, I've never been pulled into court. I've never had my I've never been questioned as to the validity of my notarization. So just keep that in mind, that if you do things right, you're going to be okay. And sometimes you have to be a stickler. You kind of have to give some pushback on people that will ask you to do things that you know are not right. So if you are confident and you understand the laws, which by the way are very simple, you're going to be okay. Now, some of the things that you really need to consider is when you're looking at a document and you're looking at the ID, you want to make sure that those match. And suffixes are important. Hyphens in last names are important. And for us, again, that we are on the border of Mexico, we tend to see a lot of passports that have 2 last names. And when they're here, they tend to only use 1. And the document may only have 1. And it's probably not the very last name. So for all of my Hispanic community, you know what I'm talking about. They'll have 4 names. And so the last name is the last name in line, but they tend to use the 3rd one. And so that's not going to work. If there's a last name missing on the document, that has to be, corrected. So you're either going to fix the ID to match the document, or you're going to fix the document to match the ID. And of course, it's much easier just to fix the the document unless they actually have an additional ID that does match the document. So for example, you have a married woman, there's a discrepancy between the last name because maybe one has the maiden name versus the married name, but you may want to look at their passport. Their passport may match the document. Their driver's license maybe matches the document depending on at what time they changed what. So just make sure that you ask all the right questions. If the document doesn't match the ID, and they may give you a reason, and the reason may be legit, but that doesn't cancel your right and your responsibility to make sure that those match. So if a woman responds, oh yeah, well that's my maiden name, but I've since gotten married and this is my married name. Okay, that's a legitimate response, right? That I can understand that would happen. But it doesn't take away from the fact that her legal name right now, even though she's changed it, and she has the marriage certificate to prove that, she's changed it in that sense, but she hasn't changed her ID, so that means her legal name is still not her married name because it's not on her ID. So you are who your ID says you are. You could say you're Santa Claus, but that doesn't make it so because your ID says you're Mary Smith or John Smith or, Juan Gonzalez or whatever. So that document has to match the ID. And there are ways to resolve that. And if you would like to have more in-depth training about that, you'll need to come to my masterclass and I'll teach you exactly what the 4 things are that you can do to resolve that issue. But we won't go into that today because that's very long. Now, once you have determined that the person that's in front of you is who they say they are, then you can have them sign and you can acknowledge and notarize the document. Now, what happens though if there is that discrepancy between suffixes and hyphens and all of that? Well, that's, like I said, that's something for a whole other video. Come to my masterclass and I'll teach you everything about how to resolve all those different types of discrepancies. You may not be able to notarize the document until you can get everything resolved. So because that is very, very important. Then beyond making sure that the person is who they say they are, they may even need to sign a identity affidavit. But let me just tell you something, that if someone is lying about who they are, signing an identity affidavit isn't really going to faze them because they're already gone into lying, maybe using a false ID, and if you ever have an ID that maybe doesn't look quite right, I mean, we're not there to determine if the identification is real or not, but if you ever have the sense and you're looking at it and there's just something off, and if they don't have any additional identification, whether it's a passport, a concealed handgun weapon ID, military ID, anything like that can supplement or really with 100% conclude that this is who they are, then my suggestion is, to walk away from that particular service at that time until they can produce an ID that would satisfy you as the notary that they are who they say they are. And people that are committing fraud will go above and beyond to try to convince you. So be very, very cautious about that. Be, aware of that people that are going to commit fraud will stop at nothing to convince you that they are who they say they are. And so it's happened to me on several occasions where I will go to a signing and, that particular person maybe doesn't have an ID. And most of the time it's with general notary work. You really have to be more cautious when it comes to general notary work, especially if they're signing wills or powers of attorneys. You definitely want to make sure that the person is who they say they are, that they're not under any duress, that they don't have any mental incapacities to be able to sign the document. Now, with practice and the more often you do it, you're going to gain a lot more confidence. And if you have someone that can walk you through it and that can practice with you, a mentor, someone that can teach you all those practical things that you need in the field. That's really what you need. A lot of times, trainings and courses and I'm going to say classes can teach you the theory behind everything, but the practical in front of a client, what do I do kind of scenarios, that's really what we need to learn. And so you learn it by doing it, and you learn it by listening to other people's experiences. So now I want to talk to you about some of my experiences. So one time I went to do some general notary work for a gentleman, and I told him, I ask all the questions, all the right questions on the phone, and sometimes you really have to understand that a lot of times people don't understand some verbiage, some of the terms, some of the meanings. So one of my questions is always, please have a valid ID available for me to review. And he said yes, that he did. I arrived. He did have an identification, but it was expired. And so I asked him for another one, and he was starting to get a little agitated with me, starting to say, I am who I say I am, that's me, and so on and so forth. And he presented 4 different identifications. None of them were of any use to me. None of them were valid. I think maybe one of them didn't even have a picture on it. I think one of them, the name was kind of off. And so I just couldn't do it for him. He was very upset about that. But it was, I just couldn't do it. There was no one else there that could vouch for him. I didn't know him personally. So it was crazy. For him, it was, he was really put off by it, and I can understand, if that had happened to me. But the fact that he didn't understand that he needed to have a valid ID, he didn't understand what that meant. So sometimes you really have to ask people, please make sure, or just tell them, please make sure to have an ID that is not expired. It has to have your picture. And, some people can be bothered by the fact that you're dumbing it down for them, but it's important just to make sure that everybody is clear on everything. And I personally prefer to text people, so that way it's very clear. It's not that they didn't hear it, it's not that they didn't understand it, it's in writing. So that way you can be sure that you're still going to get paid even if they didn't do what they were supposed to do on their end. All right, so I'm going to tell you the one time that I definitely had someone, actually 2 times, I definitely had someone that was committing fraud. One of the times was someone who was doing a loan signing, and she had lost her job. So she had started the process. Sometimes getting a loan can take some time, 30, 60 days. And when she started the process, she had a job. By the time I showed up with her loan documents, she didn't have a job anymore. And one of the documents within the stack that she has to sign asks if nothing has changed. So there's an affidavit for no change to her debt, no change to her income, employment, and that because they want to make sure that nothing has changed. You didn't go out and buy a Lamborghini on credit yesterday that's going to throw your debt to income ratios off, or that you lost your job, or that they maybe demoted you, or cut your salary in half, those kinds of things, because that could make a difference as to whether you qualify for a loan or not. And this particular lady had lost her job. And so I explained to her the importance of notifying the lender, and that if she signed the document stating that there had been no changes to her income, she was committing fraud. She says, I'm going to sign it, I'm going to move forward. Okay, great. And I did notify her. I said, I will need to notify the lender of what you stated. And even though you're signing everything, you at this time do not have employment. You are not employed. You have no income. Is that correct? She said, yes. I said, okay, go ahead and sign everything. Just know that by signing, it specifically states there that it is a federal crime to lie about your income. It's mortgage fraud. And she didn't seem to be fazed by that. So I said, okay, great. Well, let's move forward. And so I did finish it. I did put a big note on the front of the package letting the lender know what she had told me. And then it's just on them. There's not going to be any liability for me. And One other time, it was very serious. There was a woman that had a brother. They were both owners of the property, and a property that had been handed down to them. Well, the brother was very sick. He was in the hospital, and she wanted to sign documents for the sale of the property that they had inherited. The brother was in a coma in the hospital, and because he couldn't sign, and she just thought, well, I'll get all the money. I'll sign everything and I'll get the money. So she, moved forward, came up with a plot and a plan to steal this house, steal the money from her brother who was in the hospital. So she convinced another family member to come in his place, and he brought an ID that belonged to the sister's father. So her father had the same name as her brother, with the exception that the brother was a junior. So when he gave me the ID had, I'm just going to call him John Smith. The ID said John Smith. The document said John Smith Jr. because he was the son that was supposed to be signing. So not only did she have someone else come in the brother's place, they used the father's ID. Now, keep in mind the father is deceased. So the title company, mind you, I didn't for any moment believe that they were committing fraud. And so I allowed them to sign everything. I submitted it to the title company along with the ID that they provided. Title company came back and said, hey, the person in the ID, is that the person that was there? I said, absolutely. They look the same. So I have to assume that it was probably a family member, probably maybe even an uncle. So title says, listen, that ID shows a person that is much older than the person that should have been there. So he sends over an ID and said, is this the person that was there? I said, no. The person that was there is the person from the original ID that I sent to you. So I called the signer and I said, hey, listen, I'd like to speak to your brother. I'd like to meet with him and have him sign an affidavit of identity. And she says, oh, don't worry about it. He died yesterday. I was like, what? What are you talking about? So title knew that the brother had been in the hospital, had been in a coma, but the sister said he was fine, he could sign, and they were good to go, which was a big fat lie. He did pass away, unfortunately, and luckily title did catch it. I didn't get into trouble. They simply canceled everything because they found out that in fact the sister was trying to steal the house from her brother, get all the funds. She thought, his family's going through funeral, grieving, they're not even going to notice, they're not even going to think about it, and by the time they find out that the house has been sold and the money has been in her bank account and spent, it was going to be too late. So had title not caught that, now keep in mind there was no way for me to know the age of the person that should have been in front of me. That's not information they give to you up front. But I shouldn't have allowed it to move forward knowing that the documents said junior and the ID did not have junior on it. But it happens a lot. A lot of times people use the junior or don't use the junior, or use the third and don't use the third. Senior, don't use the senior. It happens a lot. People just drop it or they add it and then the document doesn't have it. And so that's a big problem with those suffixes. So just keep that in mind, that if something is off to you or something just doesn't match, ask for more. I should have asked for another identification. I should have said, hey, what's the problem here? Why does your ID not have junior on it and the documents do have the junior? I should have called title at that moment and questioned it, and we could have prevented all of that. So this is what happens when you just don't follow everything to the letter of the law. So remember that at the end of the day, you are ultimately responsible for identifying the person that's in front of you. If you are not doing that, you're not fulfilling your purpose as a notary. So do your due diligence and keep watching my videos so that you can learn more about the things that have happened to me, tips that I'm going to share with you. And if you'd like more information, ask me for my free ebook, and I'll even send you the business plan. Happy notarizing, everyone, and happy 2025.